Hi all, we're going to look at the second World Championship game played yesterday. Thankfully it was a lot more exciting than the first. Anand kicked off with d4. Usually he's an e4 player, so this is a bit of a surprise already. Kramnik responded with knight f6, so avoiding the Slav variation. After c4, e6 we have a Nimzo Indian. And Anand plays knight c3, so mainline Nimzo Indian. Not messing around with knight f3, so allowing the pin. And now playing the very sharp move f3. So f3 loses a bit of time moving another pawn and not developing, but White's contesting that control of the e4 square and prepares maybe e4 in some lines. Now Kramnik played d5, so he's immediately putting pressure on the centre. Anand took the opportunity to play a3 to grab the dark squared bishop. So really in this situation White is a bit behind in development, but on the other hand has the two bishops, and these could become very dangerous later on. Kramnik now played c5, so increasing that central tension, and now we see c takes d5, and after knight takes d5, this is a theoretical move now. I don't think anything else is very good. He played d takes c5, so it breaks, a beginner's rule basically of capturing away from the centre. You don't normally want to do this, but in this particular position, White has the two bishops and wants to play for e4 as a top priority, and doesn't want to take this pressure in the centre on his d pawn. So this is a logical idea, this d takes c5, which fits into the position quite well. Now f5 was played. It has the idea of discouraging White from playing e4. White can't play that immediately because it will be a bit of a disaster because of this queen h4 check. Let's have a look at that. So f takes, say f takes, this would be a disaster for White. So what Anand does now is queen c2. So as well as protecting the c3 pawn, potentially now he's preparing e4, and this will open up the bishops a little. Now knight d7 was played, and now Anand does play e4. So we saw taking on e4, f takes e4. So White's pawn structure is a bit dicey. Double pawns here, isolated pawn, but it's balanced by the two bishops. And White has potential, pressure on the centre a bit more than Black. Black also has this measly e6 pawn to contend with. So after knight 5 to f6, now c6 was played. A very nice move. So why was this played? Well, basically, with c6, White's going to lose that pawn anyway, and blocking that c file with Black playing b takes c means that this c3 pawn will be less under fire on the c file later from a rook blasting down. You can imagine a rook on c8 later. c6, and after b takes c6, we have kind of symmetrical pawn structure again. But White has the two bishops, so it is a dynamic, unbalanced position. After knight f3, now Black played queen a5, so quite aggressive use of the queen right out the opening, not even castling. After bishop d2, now bishop a6. So if Black can get rid of White's bishop pair, then potentially, White will end up with a bad bishop, and the knights might be able to dominate the position. So White wants to keep the bishop pair. He plays c4, and after queen c5, he plays now bishop d3. And now we see one of the most aggressive moves of the match so far, this knight g4. So diving into the opponent's territory. And now Anand played a seemingly brave move, just bishop b4. So allowing queen e3 check. But it's a harmless check in this position. And with bishop b4 it's a useful move, preventing Black castling kingside. And inviting queen e3. So after queen e3, queen e2. And now we saw Black castling queenside. So a very interesting position. So can White hold on to his position and try and exploit these two bishops? Well, he took the queen, and after knight takes, now king f2. So the king walks around now the position. After knight g4 it goes to g3. And after knight d to f6, the d3 bishop is under fire. And there seems to be quite a bit of pressure, but there's one move which is good here, bishop b1. So just keeping the bishop safe on b1, keeping protection of e4. And if White can just play h3 and king h2, White will be fine. The bishop pair will give White the advantage. But now Black plays h5, a very good move from Kramnik. Basically, the idea is a pawn sacrifice now to get this knight to the very strong e5 square. So White plays h3, and now the pawn sack, h4 check. So the king can't dare venture out because it will be very, very bad. Let's have a look at the king venturing out. e5 check. And in this position, knight h5 is very strong. So there's quite dangerous threats. And here is an example variation which shows how unpleasant it would be. Bishop takes c5, rook e5, winning that bishop. So if black gets this kind of position, he'll be winning. So basically, after h4, this pawn sack has to be accepted. And the point is basically this knight coming back to e5. So we see now black has a lot of blasting pressure on the d and h files. And also these knights are very strong, particularly the knight on e5. So black has enough for the pawn. After knight f3, knight h5 was played. And after king f2, now Kramnik took on f3. So he's giving up his good knight, but he's converting it into another kind of pressure. He plays e5, blocking in this bishop on b1. And he's got a nice potential post on f4 as well as d4. So these two posts have been secured by this pawn on e5. So after rook c1 now, protecting that c4 pawn, knight f4, and now white played a seemingly passive move but necessary, rook a2. So black's pressure has to be dealt with, and it seems, you know, white's pieces are kind of awkward and huddled on the queen side, kind of passively. After knight d3, white refused to take that knight. Let's have a quick look. If takes on d3, rook takes, king g4. Actually, you know, Rybka kind of likes this. It's a slight advantage to white, apparently. But it is opposite coloured bishops, so I think it will be technically very difficult to win this kind of position. So Anand decided he wanted to keep his two bishops for a little bit longer. He played actually rook c3, just chasing the knight back to f4. And now he played bishop c2, potentially with the ideas of bishop a4, or maybe bishop b3, and trying to get this rook out. But after knight e6, you know, this horrible threat of knight d4 is present, and so something has to be done about that. So king g3 was played, and now after rook d4, a draw was offered by Kramnik. I think Anand was in time pressure by now, and he accepted the draw. Let's have a look. If c5, trying to do something about that c pawn, then knight f4, and it seems black pieces are very well placed, very aggressively placed, and has enough for the pawn. But say rook f3. Actually, you know, the engines, Rybka likes this at a low depth at least. It thinks white's slightly better still. But it's difficult to unravel from this position. And black has a lot of pressure, like rook h5 is a dangerous move, with the idea of rook g5. And after king h2, well, actually, again, you know, Rybka really kind of likes white. But this pressure is kind of scary to face in an over-the-board game. So, you know, maybe, you know, Anand did the right thing, and after that rook d4 and the draw offer, he accepted it. Let's have a quick overview and summary of this game. So, it was a Nimzo Indian defence with f3 being played. And after d5, now white played a3, encouraging black to give up that dark squared bishop. And now we saw this seemingly unintuitive move capturing away from the centre, but it is a theoretical move. And after f5, black is trying to clamp down on white's e4, but queen c2 prepares e4 anyway. After knight d7, we see e4 being played. It leaves white with these isolated pawns, and white has the two bishops, though, to balance that. After knight 5 f6, now c6, a very good pawn sack. The c6 pawn here favours white a little bit more than being on b7. After knight f3, now queen a5 was played. And black tried to get rid of one of white's bishops, but now c4, an attempt to keep the two bishops, and it leads to this sharp situation with knight g4 being allowed. So it's difficult for white to castle anywhere, and he just encourages a queen invasion with queen e3 to try and get the queens off and use his two bishops later. But black has enough pressure, it seems, here, so something has to be done about the bishop on d3 now. It just moves back to b1. And now we see h5, so another aggressive move with the idea of h4 sacking a pawn to get these knights firmly entrenched in the centre. So this pawn sacrifice had to be accepted. The king couldn't come out. After knight e5, there's other targets now for white, like this c4 pawn and the potential of rook d2 in some relations if white's not careful. After knight f3, black played knight h5 check. And now, after king takes f3, there's e5, so blocking in that bishop on b1 and also securing these two squares as good outposts for the pieces. So after rook c1, now knight f4. Now rook a2, so potentially this bishop could be useful if it could move away to say c5, but you know, white doesn't want to give up the control of the 7th rank. So after knight d3, rook c3 was played. Again, trying to keep the two bishops, not wanting to snap that knight on d3. Pardon me. And after knight f4, now bishop c2. And now knight e6, and it looks as though, you know, black's got adequate compensation. So after king g3, rook d4, and a draw was offered and accepted. I hope you enjoyed that second game. Much more exciting than the first, I'm sure you'll agree. Please leave any comments on YouTube. Thanks very much.